Welcome to TUV's webinar on 8 tips for managing a FSMA-compliant food safety training program. This webinar will last approximately 25 minutes and will be followed by a live Q&A. So let's get started. With many FSMA compliance dates soon nearing or past, regulated food businesses must ensure management and site personnel are adequately trained and knowledgeable to carry out their respective job responsibilities. But how do you maintain a food safety training program that ensures all individuals carrying out various program functions are initially and continually equipped with the necessary knowledge, skills, and training? In this webinar, TUV will provide an overview of FSMA training requirements across the suite of rules, discuss training pitfalls and how to avoid, identify 8 tips to help you manage an effective food safety training program that keeps management and frontline employees up to date with FSMA regulatory requirements, emerging food safety risks, and industry best practices. And lastly, we'll discuss some useful training resources. Many business operations integral to the U.S. food supply chain, including food manufacturers, produce growers, transportation operations, and importers, must ensure knowledgeable and experienced individuals are designated for carrying out food safety responsibilities required by FSMA. For many of the rules, these persons are defined as qualified individuals and must have appropriate education, training, and/or experience to produce safe food. In most cases, this requires additional training on food safety management and regulatory implementation. And while the term qualified individual is not explicitly referred to in the produce safety and sanitary transportation rules, the expectation remains for one or more designated and competent supervisors to receive appropriate food safety training for the purpose of overseeing operational activities to ensure FSMA compliance. This includes ensuring operational personnel, both temporary and permanent, receive training in safe food handling practices and hygiene. In the following slides, we will take a look at some of the specific training requirements for food operations regulated by FSMA. Food manufacturers are primarily regulated by the preventative controls and intentional adulteration rules. For each of these rules, the regulation requires that qualified individuals be responsible for conducting assessments and implementing activities of the food safety and food defense systems. Within preventative controls regulation, qualified individuals will also be specialized with responsibility for specific compliance activities. This includes the requirement for a preventative controls qualified individual, or PCQI, who has responsibility for developing and overseeing the food safety plan. It may also include the requirement for a qualified auditor, where verification activities include supplier audits. Designated PCQIs should successfully complete the Food Safety Preventative Controls Alliance, or FSPCA, Preventative Controls Training course and document completion of this training. Qualified auditors, such as government inspectors or third-party auditors working for an accredited certification body, will be best served to assess FSMA compliance by also completing the FSPCA's Preventative Controls course. Qualified individuals with responsibility for developing and implementing a site's food defense plan should complete the FSPCA's Intentional Adulteration Training course, which will be provided by the Alliance as a webinar. Growers complying with the produce safety rule must designate at least one supervisor or responsible party who will ensure the farm is compliant with the regulation. Individuals in this role are required to complete the Produce Safety Alliance, or PSA, Produce Safety Training course, which is the FDA-recognized curriculum. Other training requirements under the produce safety rule include principles of food safety and hygiene for all persons handling produce covered within the scope of the regulation. Additional training for those persons harvesting produce include recognizing and not harvesting contaminated produce, container inspection, and corrective action for non-conforming produce, equipment, and containers. Personnel training requirements related to food safety and regulatory compliance are also prescribed under the Sanitary Transportation and Foreign Supplier Verification Program rules. Under the Sanitary Transportation Rule, carriers responsible for ensuring sanitary conditions during transportation, including temperature management critical to food safety, must receive initial and refresher training on potential food safety problems that can occur during transportation, sanitary practices to mitigate potential problems, and the carrier's responsibilities for regulatory compliance. Under the FSVP rule, designated individuals responsible for developing an operations foreign supplier verification program and conducting program activities must have the appropriate education, training, and/or experience to carry out job responsibilities. They must also understand supplier records in the language written. And while not explicitly required by the regulation, it is recommended that qualified individuals developing the FSVP or qualified auditors conducting verification audits complete the FSPCA Foreign Supplier Verification Program training course. So now that we've reviewed some of the core training requirements across the suite of FSMA rules, let's discuss some potential training pitfalls to avoid when developing out a FSMA-compliant food safety system for your operation. Pitfall number 1. Corporate or site management complete the FDA-recognized course to develop a compliant food safety system for their operation, but the acquired knowledge and information on how to implement the system is not passed on to frontline employees, or it is done so in an ineffective or inconsistent manner. Pitfall number 2. Individuals developing the food safety or food defense systems are not adequately familiar with the food products or knowledgeable and experienced in operational processes, associated hazards and vulnerabilities, effective controls, and appropriate verification. This leads to the development of an ineffective food safety or food defense plan where hazards or vulnerabilities may be overlooked or controls do not consistently work. It's important to note that this pitfall may be more common for some of the rules due to new requirements for individuals that may not have previously been required to participate in developing and implementing food safety practices for their operation. Therefore, initial and continuing food safety training for individuals in these roles is highly critical to the success of the food safety and food defense systems. Pitfall number 3. Frontline workers are engaged in FDA-recognized training, understanding the site's food safety system and how to implement within the context of their job responsibilities, but the food safety system is ineffective as a result of a lack of appropriate education and experience by those involved in its development. However, food safety training pitfalls can be avoided by providing learning opportunities that help develop an individual's broad understanding of existing and emerging food hazards, effective controls, and system management in addition to regulatory specific training such as the FSPCA courses. Establishing a written training program which identifies all personnel, including temporary, seasonal, and permanent employees, food safety related job responsibilities, and individual training needs according to the applicable FSMA regulation. By ensuring effective communication, which is critical for achieving learning objectives. This includes developing and conveying information at a level that is appropriate for the given audience. Since food safety is a technical subject, it will be important to translate technical information into easy-to-understand concepts for non-technical persons to achieve the greatest level of understanding and, in turn, compliance. Training in the learner's native language or a language that is well understood is also very important. Providing training in shorter, more frequent learning sessions to increase subject matter retention and help employees stay up to date on emerging food safety risks, operational changes related to food safety, regulatory changes, and food defense or food safety plan revisions. Training sessions should also take a variety of forms, for example, classroom instruction, self-paced, and on-the-job learning, with a focus on practical implementation of learning objectives. So now that we've discussed training pitfalls to avoid, let's begin with 8 tips to help you make the most of your food safety training program. Ensuring that all persons handling food for further processing or sale to consumers are knowledgeable and trained in their job responsibilities, applicable food hazards, and controls is paramount to the food safety system. In consideration of the scope and evolving nature of food safety training needs for FSMA or GFSI scheme compliance, it is best practice for one or more individuals, along with a designated backup, to be responsible for the operations food safety training program. Responsibilities for individuals in this role may involve establishing training procedures and record-keeping requirements for conducting and documenting training activities, maintaining a matrix or database of training competencies and associated activities, notifying personnel of training requirements, coordinating and tracking completion of training, maintaining training records, assessing training effectiveness for individual learners, implementing corrective action where training is ineffective, and analyzing completed activities against training KPIs and reporting results. In addition to designating an individual responsible for the food safety training program, establish a training procedure and record-keeping system for conducting and documenting training. A training procedure should include instructions for ensuring the quality and consistency of food safety training. It should be noted that GFSI benchmark food safety schemes typically require a documented training program which addresses most of the following criteria. The training procedure may include the scope of training and responsibility, the method for identifying training needs and tracking completion of training, knowledge assessment requirements, minimum qualifications for in-house instructors, key performance indicators and targets to measure training program success, and record-keeping requirements. All food safety training activities for FSMA and GFSI scheme compliance must be documented and records retained. Records should identify key information such as the training course, the trainer name, date completed, duration, and scope of course. Where certificates are issued, there should be a mechanism for maintaining these in a central location accessible to the food safety training program manager to record completion of the training activity. Where third-party training providers are utilized or training is completed in a learning management system, the site must ensure that record-keeping practices capture these external activities. Next, define food safety training requirements for all personnel. This includes management, full-time staff, and temporary or seasonal workers. When determining food safety training requirements, it is important to assess job responsibilities for the individual as well as all FSMA rules have the expectation that persons handling food have the appropriate education, training, and/or experience to perform their duties and comply with the regulation. Working cross-functionally with the operations HR department may support in identifying job responsibilities which can be further assessed for their impact on food safety. Once individual food safety job responsibilities are assessed, training competencies can be defined which take into consideration regulatory compliance requirements, for example, PCQI status, and scheme or customer-specific expectations. Training needs should be documented for each individual in a matrix or database and include the frequency of training, which can be applied through notification alerts to facilitate training program management. Following the establishment of training competencies, determine training activities. Training activities should define the learning objectives and may take a variety of forms ranging from in-person training to on-the-job or self-paced training. In-person training may be on or off-site and is typically conducted by an internal or third-party subject matter expert. Classroom courses may be used for training preventative controls qualified individuals, produce operations supervisors, or other qualified individuals with responsibility for ensuring FSMA compliance according to FDA-recognized curriculum. On-the-job training can be conducted in a variety of ways, including shadowing, job rotation, site visits, and job aids. On-the-job training provides practical experience and should be used to supplement classroom or self-paced learning. It is particularly effective at training individuals on recognizing conditions which can cause food hazards and implementing food safety controls. Self-paced training can take the form of e-learning, professional development webinars, or reading instructional texts such as procedures. Central tenets of adult learning theories focus on the concept that adults are self-directed learners and prefer to take responsibility for their own learning. Adult learners also draw on previous experience when learning and are task-oriented, which can fit well with self-paced learning activities, provided that they are designed to meet the needs and preferences of adult learners. Self-paced learning may be appropriate for refresher training or to provide more frequent training on select topics. For FSMA-related training, the Food Safety Preventative Controls Alliance provides quarterly update webinars which are recorded and freely available. Other professional development webinars on food safety-related topics may be accessed from GFSI schemes such as SQF Learning Lunches. Alternatively, e-learning courses on food safety-related topics are increasing in availability and can be purchased from training providers such as the BRC Academy. Links to FSMA and GFSI scheme training courses are provided at the end of this webinar. Continuing on, track completion of training manually or in a semi-automated or automated system. Manual tracking of training activities is commonly performed using an Excel spreadsheet or similar tool. Manual tracking may be the most cost-effective for small firms with few employees to train, but it may become time-consuming and ineffective when training a large workforce for regulatory compliance. Numerous software tools are currently available providing cloud-based solutions to managing food safety workflows. When considering software as a service options, look for a product that has a training module to help you track training activities for the operation. Learning management systems, or LMS, are utilized by e-learning service providers, allowing individual learners to manage their own training and knowledge assessment. Learners will typically have a unique user ID with access to a variety of courses where they can manage their own training in a dedicated system with administrative oversight. Knowledge assessment is a critical part of an effective training program and should measure knowledge, comprehension, and the ability to apply learned concepts. There are a variety of ways to measure what the learner gained from the training and may include pre- and post-training surveys, where pre-training surveys can generate baseline data to identify what the learner understood prior to participating in the training, which can then be followed by post-training surveys to measure newly acquired knowledge. Quizzes and exams are common knowledge assessment tools and should be balanced with both theory and applied questions. Theory questions can measure learned knowledge and training comprehension, whereas situational or case study questions can measure applied learning. Internal audits are an effective tool for observing applied learning of food safety practices, which can be assessed against site procedures, regulation, and scheme requirements. Effective implementation of the food safety system and consumer safety is dependent upon whether the necessary competencies were achieved through the training. Where learning objectives were not achieved or only partially achieved, retraining is necessary. Retraining may be required for a variety of reasons, including a lack of learner motivation, learner needs not being met, for example, literacy issues, or ineffective training activities. Adjust training activities and try different formats for individual learners based on the outcome of knowledge assessments. Where training activities do not prove effective, you should reestablish these activities for improved learning engagement. And lastly, establishing key performance indicators, or KPIs, and targets are necessary to measure the effectiveness of the operations food safety training program and improve it. Possible indicators of training effectiveness may include training completion rate, pass-fail rate, average test score, job competency rate, for example, time to competency, average time to completion for self-paced training, instructor performance, learner satisfaction, and job impact. Now, job impact can be measured by a variety of indicators and could include increased operational efficiency by using baseline production efficiency metrics and looking at the difference before and after a defined period of training, or by looking at reductions in operational and audit nonconformities related to food safety practices. So now let's review some key takeaways regarding FSMA requirements for training. Qualified individuals are required by the preventative controls, intentional adulteration, and FSVP rules. One or more PCQIs is required by the preventative controls for human and animal food rules. Qualified auditors must conduct supplier verification audits where required by the preventative controls and FSVP rules. Competent supervisors trained in food safety principles, hygiene, and regulatory compliance are required by the produce safety and sanitary transportation rules. And for all rules, any person handling food must have received food safety and hygiene training. Building on FSMA requirements, an effective food safety training program should identify food safety training competencies for all personnel, determine training activities and their frequency, track completion of the training and record, assess knowledge and identify retraining needs, and analyze training effectiveness and the impact through KPIs. Listed on the slide are some useful references on training courses and webinars related to FSMA compliance and implementation, as well as food safety training offerings by GFSI benchmark schemes. Follow the TUV Academy link to learn more about TUV's upcoming training courses. So now it is time for the Q&A portion of this session. We invite you to submit your questions, and Paul and I will go ahead and attempt to answer them. Thank you.